The velvet curtains of the past have a peculiar way of parting, revealing not just the blinding glare of the spotlight, but the deep, lengthening shadows that always follow the brilliance of fame. There is an unmistakable magic to an era where elegance was a shield and decorum was a weapon, a time when the public demanded perfection and the studios manufactured it with meticulous care. To step back into that golden age of entertainment is to enter a world of structured illusion, where every smile was rehearsed, every posture was calculated, and the grand tapestry of show business was held together by a strict, unyielding hierarchy. We find ourselves drawn to those crowded stages that felt like entire universes, places where the laughter was loud and the manners were immaculate. Yet beneath the polished surface lay a delicate, simmering friction. It was an environment built on the absolute necessity of keeping up appearances. A gilded cage where the actors played their parts with such dedication that the line between the performance and the reality began to blur. Behind the meticulously arranged counters of a grand fictional empire known as Grace Brothers, a singular phenomenon was born in the early months of 1972. To the casual observer, it was a masterclass in sharp, quick-witted workplace comedy, an unforgettable realm filled with outrageous innuendo, rigid class rules, and a collection of clashing egos who transformed the simple act of selling clothes into a highly orchestrated comic warfare. The audience watched in absolute delight as these characters navigated their miniature battlefields of wounded pride and social ambition, never realizing that the true drama was unfolding just beyond the reach of the hot studio lights. For beyond the echoing waves of laughter and the bright, glamorous facade of the department store floor, there was a quiet, unfolding history marked by sudden, unexplained exits, deeply tragic losses, and careers that took the most unpredictable, bittersweet turns. The pristine counters and the elegant displays served as a beautiful, deceptive cover for a group of performers who were bound together by a unique chemistry, even as their individual lives harbored secrets, hidden pains, and the slow, inevitable approach of their final curtains. At the absolute center of this chaotic, beautiful world stood the figures who gave the establishment its rhythm, men who treated the absurdity of their surroundings with the solemn dignity of a royal court. There was the proud, polished floor walker who moved with military precision, a man whose clipped authority and stiff posture made him a legendary symbol of British sitcom majesty. Alongside the well-meaning but utterly hopeless manager who occupied the grand office without ever truly capturing control of the floor beneath him. They were the architects of an era, commanding the scene with a dry, restrained brilliance that kept the farce moving beautifully, while younger, more rebellious spirits waited in the wings, ready to puncture the store's immense sense of importance. As we begin to peel back the layers of this unforgettable tapestry, we catch the faint, nostalgic scent of a bygone glamour, a reminder that the most captivating stories are often those that refuse to reveal their secrets all at once, leaving us to wonder about the real faces behind the counters, the hidden struggles of the icons we thought we knew, and the quiet, dramatic truths that remained unspoken when the cameras finally stopped rolling. To understand the true weight of the crown worn by the legends of Grace Brothers, one must step past the bright satin ribbons of the display cases and enter the dim, narrow corridors where the echoes of the studio audience could no longer reach. The path to this unique brand of television immortality was never a simple stroke of fate. It was a grueling journey forged in the dying days of traditional music halls and wartime theaters, where actors learned to guard their dignity as if it were their most precious possession. As the golden years of the series took hold throughout the 70s, the facade of the grand department store grew increasingly perfect. Yet behind the scenes, the pressure to maintain that flawless illusion began to take a quiet, exhausting toll on the cast. Egos clashed in the makeup rooms. The rigid hierarchy of the script often mirrored the real-world tensions of the actors, and the first whispers of creative exhaustion began to ripple through the ensemble. The spotlight was a demanding master, and for those who stood beneath it, the cost of keeping the world laughing was a relentless adherence to a routine that left very little room for personal fragility. Among those who carried the heaviest burden of this structured perfection was Frank Thornton, who breathed life into the unforgettable Captain Peacock. Born in the quiet streets of Dulwich, London, on January 15, 1921, Thornton was already a seasoned 51-year-old veteran of the stage when he first adjusted his immaculate carnation for the cameras in 1972. He understood implicitly that the comedy of Peacock did not come from making faces, but from an unyielding, almost tragic seriousness in the face of absolute absurdity. He treated the chaotic sales floor as if it were a literal battlefield of manners, navigating the dramatic outbursts of his colleagues with a clipped, frozen authority that masked his own character's deep-seated insecurities. Off-camera, Thornton was a man of quiet intellect, continuing his acting journey long after Grace Brothers closed its doors, eventually endearing himself to a completely new generation through his work in Last of the Summer Wine before his final exit in 2013 at the remarkable age of 92. Yet, during those peak years, the tension of maintaining that rigid, stiff-backed posture was a nightly battle against the changing tides of a modern world that was rapidly leaving the old rules of class behind directly across the floor. Occupying an office that symbolized power but held very little actual control was Nicholas Smith as the bald, delightfully awkward Mr. Rumbold. Born on March 5, 1934, in Banstead, England, Smith was 38 when the journey began, tasked with portraying a man who was perpetually out of his depth. He brought a rare gentle innocence to the role of management, ensuring that Rumbold was never seen as a tyrant, but rather as a confused, strangely lovable bureaucrat whose grandest plans routinely collapsed under the weight of his staff's overwhelming personalities. Smith's distinctive look and nervous, hesitant pauses became iconic, but behind that comedic hesitation was a deeply dedicated actor who understood the precise mechanics of the farce. When he passed away in 2015 at the age of 81, following complications from a sudden fall, he left behind a legacy that reminded the world how difficult it truly is to play the least prepared person in the room with such flawless, mathematical precision. While the older guard fought to maintain a semblance of order, the series required a youthful, rebellious spark to puncture the overblown solemnity of the establishment. A role that fell squarely upon the shoulders of Trevor Bannister. Portraying the cheeky junior salesman, Mr. Lucas, Bannister entered the store in 1972 at the age of 38, having been born on August 14, 1934, in Durrington, England. Lucas was the living embodiment of working-class mischief, a restless spirit who spent his days flirting with the ladies' department, challenging Captain Peacock's questionable military credentials, and refusing to buy into the illusion of the store's grand importance. Bannister's sharp timing and relaxed, effortless confidence gave the early seasons a vital, contemporary pulse, creating a beautiful tension on the sales floor. However, the behind-the-scenes reality of a hit show can be fickle, and by 1979, the delicate balance dissolved, leading to Bannister's sudden and permanent exit from the series due to scheduling conflicts and changing creative directions. Though he continued to find success in the theatre before his sudden passing from a heart attack in 2011 at the age of 76. His departure left a noticeable scar on the original chemistry of the show, proving just how fragile the internal mechanics of a legendary ensemble truly are. To heal that rift and ground the comedy in something more substantial, Arthur English stepped onto the set in 1976 as the down-to-earth maintenance man, Mr. Harmon. Born on May 9, 1919, in Aldershot, English was 57 when he brought the grit of the store's back corridors directly onto the polished sales floor. Where others worried about titles and commissions, Harmon arrived with heavy tools, blunt working-class opinions, and an absolute refusal to be intimidated by the pretenses of his social superiors. English played him with a rough-edged warmth and a dry, knowing humour that immediately shifted the rhythm of the later seasons. Behind that expressive face and unmistakable, gravelly delivery was a man who had survived the harsh realities of the old variety circuits, a performer who knew that the mask of comedy often hides a lifetime of hard work. When he left the stage for the final time in 1995, succumbing to complications related to emphysema at the age of 75, he left a void that could never be filled. A quiet reminder that the most authentic voices are often found behind the scenes, watching the grand parade with a knowing smile. Yet, no figure embodied the strange, detached nature of the store's leadership, quite like the ancient and eccentric owner himself. Young Mr. Grace, brought to life by the delicate talents of Harold Bennett. Born way back in the twilight of the 19th century on September 17, 1898 in Hastings, Bennett was already 74 years old when the show premiered. The running joke of his youthful title was a beautiful bit of irony, as everything about his frail, slow-moving frame suggested a bygone era of Victorian commerce. He would arrive on the floor surrounded by a glamorous entourage of attentive nurses, throwing the entire department into immediate panic with a single softly spoken decree, before delivering his iconic benediction. "You've all done very well." Bennett's comic timing was an exercise in absolute minimalism, using tiny gestures and wavering energy to command the entire room. He carried the history of the theatre in his bones, and when he suffered a fatal heart attack in 1981 at the age of 82, the show lost its symbolic anchor. His passing marked the end of an era within the narrative, forcing the glamorous facade to fracture further as the real world began to intrude upon the isolated, timeless kingdom of Grace Brothers. As the decade of the 1970s began to wane, the cracks in the glittering facade of Grace Brothers could no longer be concealed by clever script writing or the deafening cheers of the studio audience. It was during this turbulent period that the thin line between behind-the-scenes reality and on-screen fiction completely dissolved, plunging the tightly knit cast into a season of profound grief, sudden transitions, and whispers that the magic was slipping away. The industry watched in silence as the studio doors remained firmly shut to the public, keeping the mounting drama hidden from the millions of loyal viewers who still tuned in every week, expecting nothing but light-hearted farce. The reality, however, was that the passage of time was becoming an uncredited character on the set, ruthlessly dictating the fates of the actors who had poured their lives into these beloved roles. The corporate masters of the television network and the powerful studio executives maintained a strict wall of silence, eager to protect their golden goose from any taint of real-world melancholy or scandal. Even as the dressing rooms became spaces of quiet mourning and anxious uncertainty, the first devastating blow to the heart of the ensemble arrived with the fading health of Arthur Brough, the man who had defined the traditional, grumbling spirit of the men's clothing department as Mr. Granger. Born on February 26, 1905 in Petersfield, England, Brough was 67 when he first brought his immense theatrical experience to the sales counter in 1972. Granger was the emotional anchor of the old retail traditions, a man fiercely protective of his territory, prone to dozing off on the job, and possessing a sudden, explosive temper that beautifully countered the younger, more restless staff members. Yet, beneath that gruff, deeply traditional exterior, Brough infused the character with a quiet, aching vulnerability that hinted at a life spent watching the world change too quickly. The true tragedy, however, unfolded far away from the cameras in the early months of 1978, when Brough's beloved wife of over 40 years passed away. Overwhelmed by an unbearable grief that no spotlight could cure, Brough's own health rapidly deteriorated, and he passed away just months later at the age of 73. The loss was a catastrophic shock to the production, the studio leadership, desperate to keep the tragedy from dampening the show's comedic appeal, quickly reworked the scripts, moving forward with a rotating door of replacements, while the cast quietly wept for the loss of their foundational patriarch. In an effort to fill the immense void left by Brough's passing, the series entered a chaotic period of transition, introducing new personalities to the sales floor in a bid to replicate the lightning in-a-bottle chemistry of the original lineup. Among those drafted into the shifting world of Grace Brothers was James Hayter, who arrived in 1978 to portray the dignified, old-school senior salesman Mr. Tebbs. Born in British India in 1907, the 71-year-old Hayter brought a magnificent, polished theatricality to the role, famously known to audiences as the definitive voice of Friar Tuck in Disney's animated Robin Hood. Though he played the part with an impeccable grace and a gentle absurdity that temporarily stabilized the men's department, his tenure was cut short after just one series, as the grueling production schedule and the heavy burden of replacing a legend took its toll, leading to his quiet departure before his passing in 1983. He was swiftly followed by the veteran actor Alfie Bass, who stepped onto the floor as Mr. Goldberg, a senior salesman with a completely different, streetwise energy. Born in London's East End in 1916, Bass was 63 when he joined the ranks, infusing the character with a sharp, practical understanding of human nature that allowed him to navigate the complex store politics with ease. Yet, despite his brilliance and deep dramatic pedigree, the original rhythm of the show had been permanently altered, and Bass's brief, albeit memorable, stay highlighted the growing difficulty of keeping a vintage formula alive in a rapidly evolving television landscape before his own death in 1987. As the show pushed into the dawn of the 1980s, the production team made a final, desperate attempt to recapture the surreal, multi-generational magic of the early years by manipulating the corporate hierarchy of the store itself. With Harold Bennett's passing, the writers introduced Kenneth Waller as Old Mr. Henry Grace, the frail yet highly authoritative elder brother of the original owner. Born in 1927, the 54-year-old Waller had to undergo intense aging makeup to portray a character far older than himself, bringing a distinct, slightly darker comedic eccentricity to the management suite. Alongside him came a wave of new faces designed to add youth and visual flair to the fading store, including Mike Berry as the restless, modern junior salesman Mr. Spooner, and Milo Sperber as the dry, hyper-focused Mr. Grossman. Sperber's real life, hidden completely from the viewing public, carried an extraordinary dramatic weight that put the trivialities of a workplace sitcom to shame. He was a trained barrister who had narrowly survived brutal Nazi persecution in Europe before rebuilding his creative life in Britain. Appearing in cinematic masterpieces like The Spy, Who Loved Me and Brazil before passing away in 1992, the behind-the-scenes atmosphere during these final years was further complicated by the inclusion of glamorous, transient figures like Vivienne Johnson as Mr. Grace's elegant nurse and the strikingly beautiful Debbie Linden as the elderly owner's secretary. Linden, who was just 20 years old when she brought her vivid screen presence to the chaotic hierarchy of the store in 1981, represented the ultimate contrast of youth and vitality against the aging backdrop of the comedy. Tragically, the bright lights of fame masked a deeply turbulent personal life for the young actress, whose story would end in a heartbreaking premature demise in 1997 at the tragic age of 36. The studios maintained their polished public relations facade, never allowing these deep, melancholic undercurrents to distract from the tightly orchestrated laughter on screen. Yet, behind those famous double-meaning jokes and the bright, colourful sets, the surviving cast members knew they were operating within a beautiful, fading illusion, standing behind counters that were increasingly haunted by the ghosts of the friends and legends who had built the empire from the ground up. The dynamic breakdown of the fourth chapter of the report is detailed below. Part 4. The final structural layer of the Grace brothers' legacy is not found in the material assets of the fictional empire, but in the permanent, indelible mark its stars left across the history of British entertainment. When the closing credits rolled for the very last time in 1985, an entire era of broad, music hall-inspired television comedy drew to a definitive close, leaving behind a timeless library of characters who refused to fade from the public consciousness. Long after the bright studio spotlights were dismantled, the personal legacies of the principal cast members continued to surprise historians, characterized by an enduring, multi-generational affection that survived decades of shifting cultural tastes. In the quiet, twilight years of their lives, these icons often found themselves deeply bound to the identities they had constructed behind the sales counters, becoming living monuments to a specific genre of performance that prioritized mathematical comic timing, immense physical expression, and an unspoken fierce loyalty to the ensemble among the women who defined the show's dual department dynamic. Wendy Richard carved out a legendary trajectory that transformed her into one of the most recognizable faces in the history of British broadcasting. Portraying the sharp-tongued, stylish junior assistant, Miss Shirley Brahms, Richard had entered the series in 1972 at the age of 29, using her authentic Cockney wit and brilliant glamour to puncture the upper-class pretensions of the store's management. Following her long service at Grace Brothers, she accomplished a rare and seamless transition into intense television drama, capturing the heart of the nation for over 2 decades as the formidable matriarch Pauline Fowler in the BBC's flagship serial EastEnders. When she succumbed to breast cancer in 2009 at the age of 65, the nation mourned not just a sitcom favourite, but a true cultural institution whose early comedic foundations had paved the way for an unparalleled dramatic career. Her long-term on-screen partner, the magnificent Molly Sugden, similarly cemented her place in the pantheon of comedy legends through her fearless portrayal of the colourful, easily offended Mrs. Slocombe. Sugden, who passed away in 2009 at the age of 86, brought a theatrical, larger-than-life scale to the ladies' department, utilising her famous, perfectly timed double entendres to masterfully dominate the room and ensure that her character remained an unforgettable symbol of proud, uncompromising maternal authority. Simultaneously, the men's department was permanently defined by the dazzling, flamboyant charisma of John Inman, whose portrayal of the menswear assistant Mr. Humphreys yielded one of the most famous, globally recognized catchphrases in television history. Entering the store in 1972 at the age of 37, Inman infused the character with a joyful, highly sophisticated theatricality and a warm sense of perpetual mischief that completely transcended the simplistic stereotypes of the era. He treated every customer interaction as a delicate, high-stakes vignette, commanding the screen with quick wit, expressive physical movements, and an undeniable, deep-seated kindness that made him an immediate, absolute favourite of audiences worldwide. Long after his final departure from the department store floor, Inman remained fiercely dedicated to his craft, dominating the traditional British pantomime stage for decades before passing away in 2007 at the age of 71 from complications related to hepatitis A. His unique ability to balance bold, boundary-pushing humour with a generous, universal charm ensured that Mr. Humphreys remained alive in classic sitcom memory, a glittering testament to an actor who understood that true performance is an act of pure, unadulterated joy. As the passage of time continues to march past the vintage storefront of Grace Brothers, the collective impact of these artists remains beautifully preserved, their individual lifespans forming a grand timeline of dedication to the craft of laughter. Behind the eccentric, overblown rules of the shop floor lay a deeply professional, tightly knit family of actors who navigated real-world transitions, sudden personal grief, and the inevitable approach of their final curtains with a quiet, dignified grace. Their enduring portraits, from the strict military discipline of Captain Peacock to the rebellious, youthful energy of the junior sales staff, survive because classic television audiences refuse to forget the faces behind the counters. Each perfectly delivered line, raised eyebrow, and silent, shocked reaction stands as an enduring monument to their collective legacy, a timeless reminder that within the structured chaos of a grand department store, these forgotten idols succeeded in turning an ordinary workplace into an immortal stage for human comedy.